Hello, everyone with my weird hair.
Good morning and welcome to Bite-Sized Conversations with Jenny and Kylie. We're here to talk to you about business and particularly today, the mistakes that we've made in business. How are you going, Jenny?
I'm doing really well, thank you. I love this topic. I think you and I, as we said off camera, we can talk about this all day. So many mistakes / lessons / learnings that we've had in our business, each of us.
One thing we always say is that every mistake is such an important learning. You know, firstly, you never want to make it again, right? Secondly,
No, that's right.
Lost money, wasted money, whatever, but we can flip that and say, we've invested money in our learning. So, you can flip it to make yourself feel better anyway.
Exactly.
But Jenny, kick it off first. Tell us your first big or small mistake you've made in business.
I have my biggest one's probably when I very first started the company. So people who've been following us know that I started my company sitting in a cafe in Barcelona going, I've got this cool idea. Let me leave my job and start a company. And so when I came home, I'd had a client that I'd kind of been talking to during in Barcelona. And they were an amazing, beautiful client, but incredibly high maintenance. And I would just say yes to anything. And so it was like, oh, can you meet me at 11:30 tonight to discuss the contract? Of course I can. Can you come and do this at 5 in the morning? Of course I can. And so what I'd done, I trained them to basically be able to call me and ask me to do stuff that was not at all in scope of the contract, but it was because it was one of my first ones. And I was in that kind of, I need to make sure I impress this person so that they, will like me, and then they'll tell other people and they'll tell their friends, and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, so I basically trained them to use me essentially as a beck and call girl. And so I was like, turning up at ridiculous times to do negotiations of contract or to talk about the contract arrangements, even before we'd started the work. And then it was like 6 months until we actually worked together. So I'd put all this early effort in at ridiculous times of the morning and evening and tramping all over kind of European countries to get there before we actually started working. And I think it's because I trained them that would be okay. And so the lesson for me, or the mistake, was, not setting the boundaries really early about how I wanted to be treated and how the contract would work and what that looked like. And so not setting boundaries was definitely an early mistake I made in not just one, but several of my clients.
And that's such an interesting one, because how can you set boundaries when you don't really know, when your business is right at the very beginning? And so you probably never experienced someone like that,
No.
push or take or whatever and just go for it. It's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's what it was.
Before that?
It was the unknown of like, oh well, and I know that someone saying, hey, let's catch up at 11 o'clock to talk about the contract. I knew that was going to be a kind of just a random conversation, and really what it turned out is she just really liked company and wanted people to talk to. And so if she had that opportunity to kind of have a conversation and share her story and have that space to share her story, she felt supported. And so that's what I learned about her is why was she asking me to do those things? So at the time I didn't know what the boundaries were, but later on I realized is when clients are asking that kind of request and wanting kind of quite out of the ordinary requests, there's a reason for that. It's either they're lonely and they want company, they want to feel supported, or they've been, mistreated in some way with a previous coach or colleague, and they're trying to kind of test the boundaries to see what you'll do for them. And so now I'm a much more wiser coach in that regard, and consultant in the space. But yeah, it was a crazy time.
It's a big lesson in learning, isn't it, about boundaries? I love it. So
yeah. And what about yours? What's your first one?
Well, yes, I've got a number that roll into one, actually, which is when I first started my production company. So it was a TV production company, and I was living in Sydney in my late 20s, and my dad had recently died, and he was a film producer and had a couple of film companies. And so it felt really right. I'd worked in film, for years, etc. And it just felt really right that I would name it something that really just made me think of him. So my dad used to go, "You beauty," all the time about things. And so his number plate was "You then a space, BU, then a space, then T. And so when I started my own film company, I called it You Beauty, but it looked like You Butt. So and people would ring and say, is that You Butt production? And I was like, it's You Beauty. But also You Beauty was nothing to me, like nothing at all. It just happened to be something really special for me from my dad. So I very quickly learned, leave your special things with your dad at the back door. Leave it in your personal life. You don't need to bring it in, to your business. And look at ways that it can be read to work out that actually that one doesn't work at all. However, I just kind of rolled with the name challenges. Then what then happened is it was going really, really well in Sydney. I worked on some incredible films and traveled in different parts of Australia. One of them, for example, was I worked on the Crocker-Stedford Festival in Moree and in Weipa, which was just extraordinary, and going out to all these tiny little Indigenous communities, and it was just really beautiful. So basically like the Rocker-Stedford, but it was the Crocker-Stedford. So that was a really special thing. Did a bunch of things with SBS and, some private films as well, and decided to move up to the Byron Bay region because we just fell in love with it. And I thought, hey, have this business, travel anyway for it, so I can be based anywhere and just travel. And I had all my connections in Sydney, so I thought I'll just fly down and have meetings whenever is required. And no, major problem. I also thought that there'd be unlimited work going on up here for me and I would be totally needed. So the next lesson is I didn't do my research. And the first bit of research I didn't do is, what was my competition going to be up here? So my competition was not other film companies. What it was the local networks. So you could go to Channel 10, or Channel 10 would go to you as a business and say, for $100, we'll make you a TV commercial. And so there was literally 3 different scripts that they would give you that you could choose from. All ads looked exactly the same, but for $100, and then you just pay for the airtime. That was it. So how could I ever compete with that? I must confess, I did get a few jobs, which was nice, because there are going to be companies that don't want that 3 different scripts to choose from. And then off you go. But they were few and far between, and it was a massive challenge. And in terms of the getting loads of work coming out of Sydney for me, I was just before my time. We didn't have Zoom meetings or anything like that. Yes, we had email, but that was pretty much about it. And so me just flying down at the drop of a hat, because I wasn't just in their faces, it just didn't happen the same.
No.
So the lesson for me was, do your blooming research for sure. But secondly, actually, some great stuff came out of it, because I knew that I needed to diversify. And that's when I went off and studied graphic design and all kinds of other things, and turned into a media agency rather than just film. So, good things came out of it. But yeah, some really hard lessons along the way, and particularly You Butt.
Yeah, I love the You Butt. I think that's amazing. And it's so true though, right? Because we look at things written down and we look at it in what our memory and what our perspective things are. So we go, okay, it's a logo, or it's an image, or it's the name of our company, or whatever it is. And we're looking at it through the lens of our memory, not the lens of someone who doesn't know, has nothing to do with us. And I've seen that so often with logos, and I see logos come through and I'm like, wow, what is that logo? And it looks a bit weird. And then they tell you the story. I'm like, I get it now that you've told me. But beforehand, it kind of just looked a bit odd, or, slightly offensive. And so we often see that kind of, that need for some peer review or peer conversation. Say, what do you think about this?
That's so true. And I used my good friend and graphic designer, Jules Goodwin, to do the logo for it, and already I knew it was going to be problematic. So he made sure that the letters went down, not along. So the U, and then the BU, then the T, to try and alleviate it. But that, that's for business cards and things. Not everybody would see that.
No, of course.
See the email address or the whatever. Anyway, amusing and annoying for me. So Jenny, what's your next hard lesson you learned?
Mine is also from the consulting coaching space, I think, is often, or early on, I did retainers, and I still do some retainers for clients. And so I had a retainer with a particular client for a certain amount of time every week. And so my job was to go in and do that particular role for that period of time. And they wanted me in the office, and I said, look, that's fine. I'd prefer not to, but sure, let's work from the office. And what happened, because I was there for so long, and the retainer was for some time, they needed that long-term kind of in-house support. My role shifted from being a consultant and a specialist consultant providing advice, and I started to be seen as an employee. And so the shift is, of course, you lose that kind of objectivity and the ability to actually share that raw advice that you give as a consultant, that kind of truth telling you do as a consultant, because as an employee, their relationship with you and the power balance starts to change. And so because I was embedded for so long, it started to actually change the dynamics, and not in a really positive way. And at the end of it, I managed to kind of turn it around. And when I separated, I was like, I don't think you need me anymore. I think this is different work for someone else. Let's kind of step away. But it was actually a really damaging kind of process, and a really strong lesson. It was very early on in my consulting coaching space. So I was doing the work, but it wasn't being received the same way, because the lens they were looking at me from was no longer as a consultant, it was as an employee, and their expectations of what I would do every day in the office shifted to a point to things that I actually was not prepared to do, or not even contracted to do. But it didn't matter, because there was this kind of, well, you're here, I'm paying you, so therefore there's all this other stuff you can do. So I guess the lesson for me for that was being really clear about, if you're doing a retainer, or if you're doing some long-term embedded work, is making sure there's that separation and balance of, again, back to boundaries, what you do, what you don't do. And occasionally having that kind of moment of reminding, so, stepping back, and whether it's a monthly check-in to say, okay, so let me share what I've done the last month under the retainer as your contractor. And the language you use becomes really important.
Doesn't it just? Wow, that's a really, really good one. So again, boundaries, and it definitely around language. It's a really, really good one. How would you avoid that in the future?
So for me, I basically, what the lesson showed me was, when I'm talking about retainers, I very rarely do a retainer in-house to someone actually sitting at a desk, emails and that sort of stuff. I'm very much working remotely. So I'll pop in to do meetings, I'll pop in to have the strategy conversations and the direction and the kind of, hey, here's the update. But I do the work remotely. And so by doing that, there's a very clear separation that I'm not one of the team in terms of an employee. I'm definitely part of the organization team, but I'm not an employee. So very much arm's length conversations, making sure that they recognize and again, language that I use, it started to be when we do my coaching programs, we always talk about that language as part of the structure of your company, and how the language that you use, the way that you describe your services and talk to your clients and present your work, actually forms part of the structure and the identity of the company. So I became really focused on the language that I was using, and the way that I presented information. It was always co-branded with my information, saying, here's my report to you as the consultant. It wasn't just, it'd have their branding on it, but it would always have provided by me with my footer, my information. So it was very clear that it was me providing a report or some information, and not being done as someone internally. And that, again, that comes back to language and the way you show up.
Good tips there. Very, very good.
And what about you? What's your next one?
My next one is a big one financially. So this one is when I had my e-commerce business. Well, really, it was a designing business, but it was e-commerce. So I was designing kids' toys and decor. And then initially it was all being manufactured in Australia. So I would buy the fabrics as needed. I had an amazing cutter who used to cut for Country Road, and then moved up to an MO property, so multiple occupancy, out the back of Maynarm in the rainforest. So like about a half-hour drive inland from me. And when you drove up there, there was just this massive like river going down alongside, and then he had this cutting room that just opened up these doors. And so what he looked at every day and amongst the rainforest was just extraordinary. And he had this huge cutting table, and the giant machine that just cuts it. So it was quite extraordinary. But there he was in the middle of this rainforest. It was just, and I couldn't get couriers to go out there. So it was actually really lovely that, you know, that one part of my business, I was very much hands-on with the delivering of the fabric for the cutting and picking it up. And then it would get couriered off to the various sewers around and things. So what happened is, that through a friend, I got this great situation going on in Vietnam for fair trade and ethical manufacturing. So what I loved is that it didn't have to be ginormous numbers. So, you know, first time of going offshore, etc. But there's no way that my sewers here could keep up with the growth in the business. So, and I had this whole nappy bag range that was going really, really well. So I went off to Vietnam to get this first lot done. And, well, I didn't go to Vietnam, you know, I just off I went with this manufacturing. However, big rookie mistake is, again, probably about research and doing my homework, but I think even more about trusting other people more than you trust yourself. So she said to me, so, you know, we worked out all the amounts that I needed for 300 of every single product in 2 different colorways. And then she said, that fabric for your lining, and because we have to print it for you because it's particular color hue, et cetera, it'd be much better if you bought a lot of that fabric and we stored it in our factory, because having that put on layaway will be a really important thing, because prices are just going to go up and up and up. So I spent an extra $40,000, on fabric to put on layaway, because that was her advice. And, you know, she was very, very convincing. By the time I sold that business, like 8 years later or something, I still had probably, I don't know, but more than half of that fabric sitting there. Wow. So all the other production runs were done, hadn't even, you know, really dented the amount that there was there. And then I said to her, can we sell that fabric? Like, there's no way I would ship it here to sell with the business. And I wasn't even using her as in manufacturing really anymore anyway, because her prices had just gone sky high. So, and she's like, no, I don't want the fabric to leave here. And really, I'm not even sure where it is. Or anyway, it was just super, super weird. So really my lesson was, actually, so what? Who knows what's going to happen with the market in the future? At the moment, this needs to be what I'm doing. Trust myself. But because it was my first foray into, you know, doing it overseas, then I just trusted. So bad, expensive mistake.
I think, but it's a really interesting point though, because we kind of want to future-proof stuff, don't we? And so we get convinced to do that. It's like when people say, you know, oh, you need to buy bulk of this now because, you know, for whatever reason. And then you end up having a massive capital expense now that you don't need, that is a strain on the business, that remains there as a liability on the business, because it's not an asset. Well, it's technically an asset, but it's an expense that you didn't use. So it's just sitting there. And I think it comes back to that conversation that we've had previously around when you're looking at what you want to spend your money on in your business, it's being really mindful of what do you need right now, what's going to help you get to the next level, rather than saying, I need all the shiny things now. So yours was a gigantic bolt of fabric, but other people's, it might be, I need to buy the color printer in my first month of business, or I need to, you know, I need to make sure I buy all the bells and whistles, when really all you need is a laptop and a keyboard.
Or a much bigger office space to rent, because you might have staff in the future.
Yeah. And that's such a big one though, isn't it? Like, and I know we're talking about mistakes, but that's one of the big things. When I first started, I always had this idea. There's this beautiful property as I drive down Old Cleveland Road. It's an old real estate agent. It's on the corner. It's an old house. It's all white. And it has this beautiful foyer area and then big rooms out the back. And I thought, oh my gosh, one day I want to own that place with my beautiful logo on the front, or rent it. And I'm going to run my workshops and hold my coaching there. And if I'm doing my consulting work, people can come in and talk to me. And then I was like, what a vanity measure that would be. Like, that is entirely a vanity measure, right? It's got nothing to do with my ability to do my work, my success in my business. Any of those things are irrelevant. But it was me about going, I will be successful when I have this physical space and people will see me and say, wow, look at that beautiful office that they have. And then I was like, no one cares where I work from. Like, no one cares that I'm in my home office, or that what my view looks like, or if I pop into their office and use their boardroom. They don't care. It's such, but we have this kind of vanity view. And I think that's that sometimes we do that. For yours, it was taking advice as a rookie mistake. But we have the same thought process when we're doing things that, like, oh, but I think if I do this, I will feel or look or whatever it is. better to the market.
Yes, it's such an interesting one, isn't it? And I've looked often at, because I have felt a little sick over it over the years. It was so much money and such a big investment. But I've tried to look at how could I have stopped that happening. And really, I don't even know that I could have, because I didn't fully understand. Maybe if I'd got an agent rather than going through her, but then I probably wouldn't have done it at all. It was the fact that it was this friend's wife, blah, blah, blah. So,
and you take the advice that you're given, right? That's what you do.
So possibly I needed someone else's advice, but they would really, probably I wouldn't have even known who to be even looking for to get that advice. So yeah, expensive one. But what about you, Jenny? What's another for you?
I think for me, most of my lessons are around the sort of same thing, but the last one I think particularly, which is a big one for coaches and consultants, is around pricing. And it's one of the reasons why pricing is such one of the most important things that I talk about with all my clients around what is your value, what is the cost of what's the cost of doing business. And I think early on when I started the company, I charged something, and it was as a consultant fee that I thought was a fair price, but I didn't really think about how that price was created. It was like, I think that's got to be fair. I'm just going to charge this much an hour. It seems okay. So let's charge that. And in fact, I went on a coaching program who basically said, start your coaching at $100 a session. And I was above that at the time, but they were like, this is what you should charge. You start at $100 and then work your way up. And someone else is like, oh, no, start at $50 and then work your way up for whatever the hour or half an hour. And it's not so much a mistake that I made per se, but it's one of the conversations that a lot of my clients have done and a lot of mistakes they've had is that when we pick a price and we don't know what the cost of doing that work is. So whether it's a time cost, whether the effort that you're going to put in, whether there's actual physical expenses that you have to choose, that you choose a price based on kind of a pluck in the air and see what comes up rather than actually focusing on what you're doing. So my very first retainer, the same one that the challenges with the boundaries and all my lessons were learned in those first 2 contracts I had. One, I charged what I thought was a fair monthly fee, but when it looked at the amount of work they were expecting me to do and the amount of work I was giving, it was well underpriced. It was probably 50% of what I would charge now. And the cost of doing business for me was significant. In the same way, I had a beautiful client who, high maintenance, amazing, but just, and I said, yeah, I'm going to go to New York with you and spend a week in New York helping you build your program, which we did. But my brain was going, I'm basing this on an 8-hour day, which gives me time to go out at night and hang out and do the things I need to do. But I ended up turning up at 10 o'clock. And if I was lucky to leave her house by 10 o'clock at night, it would be a good day. Because the expectation for her was, well, I'm paying you pretty much to live at my house for 10 days or 7 days, but I hadn't costed it that. So when I looked at the cost and it sounded like and we do that, we go, oh, this sounds like a lot of money, right? So this is a lot of money. It must be enough. But don't go into the mistake of assuming that a large amount of money is value for you as a delivery. And you do that because all our work is our IP, our time, our effort, our team's time and effort. And that has to be costed in. And I didn't do that early enough, which is why now I have a very detailed spreadsheet that has my day rates on it, has my hourly rates, has my admin fee rates. And so when I'm charging out, particularly for large contracts, I actually use that as the basis. So I can actually, if someone says, how did you come up with that number? I literally have a spreadsheet that says, this is how many hours it's going to take me to do that task. This is how many hours my admin team's going to use or whatever it is. And I get a number at the end. And then I can choose to go higher or go lower based on the contract. But I know what the effort is into that contract. So that's something that I've learned. And now I do in everything that I do, from coaching programs to consulting work to even when I tender for other people.
Such an interesting one, Jenny. I was just having a chat. I mentor this guy in his business as a voluntary thing. He's just really struggled through the pandemic, and so just trying to help him look for different ways to pivot, basically. And one of the things when we were talking about his hourly rate, and I said, it's just not enough. When you look at what you put in beforehand, what you put in afterwards, and just how much time you spend with it in your head is so massive. So really that hourly rate is just just your time at that exact moment. But for me, you know, I gave them examples with some of my clients. There's so much that we're doing behind the scenes, and so much thought process and ideas and all that. So you're right, it's your IP. It's also your thinking. It's all the things that helps you come up with that hourly rate.
100%.
Such an interesting one.
And with that one though, and that's the thing, is when we start to look at that particular piece around what does it cost and what is it going to get, and you know, how much am I going to charge for it? We don't think of it is your IP, but that's why when I charge, so my coaching rate is, you know, people who know when they coach with me for 90 minutes, it's a reasonable cost of coaching because I think about them for 30, 40 minutes beforehand. I think about them after. I send notes through it. My team does work for them, as you say. And so when people say to me, wow, your coaching rate is high, I'll go, yes, but it's that understanding that it's my knowledge, my understanding, and my expertise that I'm sharing with you. The reason it's high is because it's going to give you the outcome you want, but also we're also wrapping you with support, right? It's not just that one. It's not like when you go to see a physio and you pay $120 for the 30 minutes that you're in the room. We don't blink about that because we're getting 30 minutes of time with our physio or with our healer or whatever it might be. But they don't think about me before and they don't think about me after. They only think about me for that 30 minutes. So they can charge, $240 an hour or $120 a session because it's a very specific in and out. Your doctor's the same, any other kind of service provider like that. They don't think about you pre and post, but the work that you and I do and our team do is there's always stuff around. So such a great lesson that you're sharing with your client, because it's such an important lesson that we forget to learn because we don't think about it early on in the business.
Absolutely. I had to write notes there while you were speaking. I loved it when you said wrapping you with support, because that's exactly what it's like. And when I talk to someone, for example, on a discovery Zoom, and I say about our coaching programs, and I say, when you're at that gold one, then you not only get me with your one-on-one coaching, but you get my whole team in this messenger support group where you can be asking questions or, whatever you want all week long. So not just in our sessions.
Yeah.
And it's gold. Like, you can't even put a price on that. It's absolute gold for what you get. So yeah, it's beautiful how you just said it's like enveloping them in this space with you. And so they get so much more.
100%.
Yeah, I love
it. What's your next lesson?
My final lesson that I'm going to share is a topic that you've already touched on, is boundaries, but I'm taking it a step further in terms of not jumping in the pool. So I think of it as not jumping in the pond, because it really is a massive splash. So I had this client, and just glorious, I have to say, just absolutely think she's fabulous. She couldn't come to me. This is pre my everything being on Zoom. She couldn't come to me. So, I went to her and went to her over and over and over. And my sessions were 90 minutes. So it was a half-hour drive there, then a 90-minute session and a half-hour drive back. So already calculate how many of those can I fit in one day. I could never change her pricing from the first day, which was the lowest, because she'd already told me she had no money and desperately needed my help, etc. So, I was doing it for a pittance. But the worst part was she was very, very unwell. And so I would say to her, right, we need to wrap up in about, 10 minutes. And she would start to cry and say, we haven't done anything that I wanted, and she'd start to get angry at me. And I'd be like, feeling terrible. I said, but that's because you also wanted to do X, Y, and Z. So, I started to get clever over time and say, I need your list before I come. And I can then tell you what feasibly we can get through in that time, what topics we can cover, et cetera, et cetera. And we never, ever did. And she would just cry and cry. So then I couldn't leave because I felt so bad for her. And she would, sometimes cry about the health, sometimes cry about the husband, sometimes cry about the work, whatever it was really emotionally intense. And I would feel so bad for her. I think the longest session I had with it was 3 hours, and charging for 90 minutes and, just a pittance of that anyway. And it was really full on, Jenny. When I went 100% on Zoom at the beginning of the pandemic, she just couldn't cope with that at all. And it was an absolute relief, absolute relief, because, it was just sucking the life out of me. And as I said, she's a really, really wonderful, wonderful human, like honestly, super, super lovely. But that was just so much. So what was my lesson is A, boundaries, B, when that situation was no longer working for me, to speak up, and C, you know, the emotional thing. I don't think I even now know how to deal with that, but you know.
That was my client. That was my overseas client. When I said I was going to go there for 8 hours, but the language that they would use, and it's very clever, is, would you be so kind as to help? Would you be so kind as to do this one thing before you leave? Yeah. And so then all of a sudden you're like, if I don't stay, I'm not kind, and I want to be kind. And I thought, oh, again, very early on in my coaching arrangement, I was calling my partner going, oh my God, I'm just in tears at the end of the sessions going, this has been the most emotionally draining day. I don't want to be here. Oh my gosh, what have I done? And he's like, just tell her, just push back. And so you try like you did with your client, and it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. We're like, but no, that boundary and but that emotional thing is so important, isn't it? I think that's one of the lessons. And because we're human, right? Yeah. We're human. And so we want to be there for our clients and our customers. We want to be there and give them what they want. And when we feel like we haven't done that, we then go, it's our responsibility to try and fix that. So I used to do that. And now I'm much better in being able to say, this is what we do. This is the workshop. And in 90 minutes, unlike my sessions these days, when I'm running face-to-face coaching sessions, I do a couple still in my home. I'm really good at now keeping to time. So it's a 90-minute session. And these days I don't run over, because I'm aware that I respect their time. And I go, you know what, we said 90 minutes, so let's do 90 minutes. And by doing that, it's actually helped me much better with my boundaries. Whereas on Zoom, I'm like, it's another 5 minutes. It doesn't matter. Yeah. But no, I'm getting so much better. And maybe that's because some of my clients too are very much like, they book meetings back to back. And so they literally book meetings for 25 minutes or 30 minutes or 15 minutes. And I know that they only give me that time. And I'm like, yes, we can just solve the problem, answer the question, and we move on. Because you don't have that kind of emotional connection of, oh my God.
What lessons we have learned, Jenni.
It's so many.
So good, so important. There's a comment in here that Keely loved wrapping you with support. I just love that too. It's so beautiful. And then she wrote, at that, Kylie, that's only 3 people a day as opposed to 5. Another 500 a day, depending on pricing, obviously, a big difference. Keely, I reckon I would at most have been getting $75 because for half a day, including 2 half-hour trips.
I know, and we don't think of that, right?
Not good.
I had to laugh when I first did my first spreadsheet. I shared it with a client, the consulting spreadsheet. They're like, how do you come up with your pricing? It seems expensive. And I showed them the spreadsheet, and I was like, so this is administration, this is QA, this is the time to develop, this is this process, this is all these things. Listing those out actually makes me as a consultant a far better consultant, because I know the time and effort that goes in to developing something. And I'm working with a client at the moment, or a colleague of mine, who I need to do a piece of work for them, but I've literally been thinking about it for 3 weeks. And probably I'm almost ready to write the content that they need. And it's just a report for a larger report, or a section of a larger report. But I need actually time to think about, okay, how am I going to process? Where does that fit? What information do I need to put? I can write them 17 pages, but they only need literally half a page of content. So I've got to get 17 pages of content into half a page. It's got to be clean, succinct, and it's got a 5-year timeline. So it needs to be relevant now and relevant in 5 years. So that I can't just sit and write that quickly. And people forget that. So when I'm doing this costing out, I always go, okay, well, I need to have thinking time. So it's like, half a day, I always add to any report I'm doing as thinking time or development time or prep or whatever it is, just so that I can actually allow myself the space to deliver the work that they need. And the same when you're doing creative, when you first have a new client and you don't really know who they are, there's that time to go, I need to get to know you, Yeah. And we don't value that. And so that's why I price it into my model now, because then I value the time when I know I'm getting paid for it. And therefore I give them a better service, because they're getting a holistic service, not just kind of half thought out process.
Absolutely. That's so good, Jenny. Keely's popped in and said also respect boundaries. So agree, Jenny.
Yeah,
Time fits into that too.
100%.
100%.
Thank
Totally.
you, Keely.
So good. So good. So Jenny, I won't be joining you for the next couple of Fridays.
No,
Well,
I know. I think we will have to see whether we might even take a couple of weeks off. Maybe we should do a midterm break. I think. I don't know. We'll have a think about it and we'll chat afterwards. But we'll be back either next week or next couple of weeks as bite size.
yes, I'm off to New Zealand to see my family, which I'm really excited about. And yeah, lots of good things happening.
It'll be so nice that you get to go home. I'm so jealous.
I'm actually doing something different this time too. So my daughter and I are flying directly into Wellington, which I'm not from, and I haven't been to Wellington in, I don't know, well over 20 years. And my mum and my sister are flying there to meet us. So we're having a girls' weekend before I then take a road trip to, go through the North Island and then eventually end up in Auckland, where I'm from. So yeah, it's actually a very quick trip, but we're going to be covering a lot in that time. But I haven't done a girls' weekend in probably forever. So
and I just want to point out, because Keely, I agree. Obviously, you're undercharging, Kylie. Mm-hmm.
But like I said, even if my rate at that point was $300 an hour and she was being charged $75, it's because initially she would have got a 50% discount anyway. It's because she was really struggling. So it was not good on it.
But Keely, I'll make you notice that Kylie rejects the conversation I have every time about her pricing. Her clients listening, going, "No, don't put your price up, Kylie." Yeah. But your work is golden, and you are. And we talk about this because the value that Kylie gives you as a client, as a customer, and even as a friend is phenomenal. And is priceless.
Thank you, Jenny. That's very, very lovely. And I love that Keely said thinking in the shower counts, Jenny. So agree. Totally does.
The amount of times I've actually used when I've been in the shower thinking about stuff and I use my finger to write on the shower screen, just randomness, which actually allows me to kind of get it out of my brain. So I'm like, oh yeah, now I know what to do. So that happens. It does count. You have an amazing trip to New Zealand, Kylie. We will see you when you're back, and look forward to chatting a little bit about holidays. But I think we should, when you come back, I think we need to talk about, for the businesses, the importance of actually taking a break from your business and planning a break, because we don't do that. And how do we make sure that we plan a break from your business? I know we're doing that. We're looking to go to a business conference in New Orleans at the end of October. And so we're having to start thinking about now, how do we plan that time out of the business? Because we can't just decide to leave tomorrow because we have commitments here. So I think when you come back, let's talk about how do we plan that time out of our business and make sure that we can actually get time for ourselves or for professional development or our family or whatever it is. And let's talk about that.
Brilliant. Sounds fantastic. I'm looking forward to it already.
Awesome.
All right. See you soon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
See you soon. Bye-bye.